there with a question tonight. How confident are you feeling about this economy right now? We got a gut check on that today, and it looks like most of us aren't feeling so great about it, because even though unemployment's low and paychecks are up, inflation seems to be bringing everybody down. We're going to take a snapshot of the economic picture coming up. Plus, former President Trump speaking in D.C. today for the first time since his term ended. His former VP's here, too. A split-screen moment on the future of the Republican Party. So is this the beginning of the battle for 2024? And a conversation you will not see anywhere else. I go one-on-one exclusively with Trevor Reed, the Marine veteran who spent 3 years in a Russian prison, telling me while he's grateful to the president that he's home, he thinks the U.S. should do more to help Brittany Griner, Paul Whelan, and others.
The White House has the ability to get them out extremely fast, and they clearly have chosen not to do that.
We've got more of that exclusive conversation coming up in just a bit. Plus, if you've got student loans, you may be in luck, with one source telling NBC News President Biden might extend how long you have to start paying it back. We'll talk about that and the chances that debt could get wiped out altogether coming up. And as part of our NBC News Missing in America series, the new science that could be a game changer for those super important early minutes when a loved one is first lost. That's coming up later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and this week kind of feels like make or break for the U.S. economy. That's because over the next 4 days, we're going to get some big signs about whether or not we are barreling toward a, brace yourselves, recession. And it's a week that may test the credibility of this White House and its optimistic economic tone ahead of a midterm push where you know the economy is going to be center stage. So let's take a look at the calendar right now, because each of the next 4 days, we're going to get a number that will give us an idea of how healthy the economy is or how healthy you think it is. Here's today's. It's called the Consumer Confidence Index. Basically, it's a survey on whether all of us Americans feel good or bad about the economy. 100 is like the neutral line, and right now it's at 95 and dropping for the third month in a row. One mother of four told our Vicky Wynn how these higher costs are stressing her out even more. Listen.
We were getting by perfectly fine on my husband's paycheck. Now it's barely making ends meet, and it's stressful and not comfortable for us to live that way.
And when consumers are not feeling confident, when people don't feel good, the markets don't seem confident either. Look at this. The Dow, the S&P, the NASDAQ all ending the day in the red. And that's just the beginning. By tomorrow, we're going to see how the Federal Reserve will hike interest rates. By Thursday, we'll get the first numbers on how the economy did in the second quarter. We're going to get to all of that soon, but I want to get first to Tom Costello. And Tom, talk about this consumer confidence thing. It basically means how good do we feel about the way that things are going economically, and it affects what companies do. We're seeing that from McDonald's and from Walmart, interestingly, in particular.
Yeah, I mean, we've got two pages there, if you will, two newspaper pages that are telling us pretty much the same story, and that is Americans are paying more for everything. You know, therefore, as a result, they're less confident about the economy going forward, and as you would expect, corporate earnings are being affected. Now, Walmart came out and said essentially that consumers are changing how they shop, right? They're not buying as many big-ticket items. They're really spending more money on food. You would expect that with the economy doing what it's doing right now. But this is such a head-scratcher of an economy, Hallie, because on the one hand, yes, we have inflation running at 9%, food up 10%, gasoline was up 60% in June. It came down surely in July, but the point is we're all paying so much for everything. On the other hand, unemployment at a 50-year low. There continues to be more jobs than people who will fill those jobs right now. Wages are going up, modestly, but going up. In fact, we still see housing prices. You know, we just set a new record for what the typical house is selling for just last week. So it's a conundrum of an economy because never before have we come out of a massive pandemic with massive stimulus money being spent to keep us out of a depression and now trying to find equilibrium. And most people who want a job can get a job, but as you would expect, a lot of the paychecks being taken up just paying for everyday goods.
So then let me ask you about the thing that feels like Voldemort right now, the thing that people don't want to name, and that is a recession, right? Are we going to be in one? Are we not going to be in one? This week may give us some more signals on that front. The president has said just the last 24 hours that he doesn't think we're going to end up in a recession. You know, this is also an administration that had downplayed the possibility of inflation hitting some of these record highs, right? Talk about where we are and what experts think.
Well, listen, I just minutes ago got done doing an interview with the chief economist at ADP, you know, the payroll company. You probably see their, and she said she doesn't think we're going into a recession because of all the reasons I just laid out. However, you know, typically we define a recession as 2 quarters of contracting economic growth. We know that the first quarter contracted. The question is, did the second quarter contract? And if it did, does that feel like a recession to you when so many people have a job? So what the president is saying and what many economists are saying is, you know, the old definition for recession really may not be appropriate anymore if you've got virtually full employment. Inflation's a problem that has to be tackled. The last point I would make on this is that, you know, the administration really doesn't have tools to tackle inflation. That's not it doesn't have any short-term immediate tools that it can grab. That's up to the Fed. And the Fed only has one tool, and it's a sledgehammer. All it can do is hit inflation as hard as it can by hiking interest rates. So we're all going to likely pay more for credit card loans, for example, and a new car loan. And if you have a bank loan, mortgage rates can be affected. They're influenced by what the Fed does. The Fed doesn't set mortgage rates. So, yeah, we'll all pay more in an effort to bring down inflation. But are we in a recession, given the strangeness of this economy? Everybody I talk to says it's just such a head-scratcher trying to get your arms around this one.
Tom Costello, I'm glad you're here to scratch our heads, I guess. I'm sure I'll see you every day this week. I appreciate it.
No, I'm not doing that. Okay.
Glad you're here for us. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. All right. To an NBC News exclusive now, our own Lester Holt sitting down with Attorney General Merrick Garland as the Justice Department faces a whole bunch of questions about what it's going to do now, right? The ball in its court after the first round of January 6th hearings and those findings. I want to play for you some of what the Attorney General told Lester as it relates to former President Trump and potential accountability for him. Watch.
The indictment of a former president, of a perhaps candidate for president, would arguably tear the country apart. Is that your concern as you make your decision down the road here? Do you have to think about things like that?
Look, we pursue justice without fear or favor. We intend to hold anyone who was criminally responsible for the events surrounding January 6th, for any attempt to interfere with the lawful transfer of power from one administration to another, accountable. That's what we do. We don't pay any attention to other issues with respect to that.
I want to go now to NBC's Ken Delanian. And Ken, you know, it's so interesting to hear Merrick Garland talk about this because so far the AG has very much held his cards close to the vest here on what the DOJ would do, whether the Justice Department thinks that Donald Trump committed an actual crime here.
Right. Yeah, Hallie, when you're trying to interpret the words of the Attorney General about a criminal investigation, it's almost like parsing the Fed chair. You have to really listen for nuance. And I heard a little bit of a more expansive view of this investigation from Merrick Garland than I believe he has articulated in the past. When he used this phrase, he said we're going to pursue those who are criminally responsible for interfering with he said the peaceful transfer and then the lawful transfer of power. He's used that phrase in the past, but in the context of the attack on the Capitol. There are indictments for seditious conspiracy against Oath Keepers, accusing them of trying to interfere with the lawful transfer of power. But the way I read him talking about it today, it was a larger universe of conduct. Because let's not forget, there are things that Donald Trump did that we learned in those hearings that really are only tangentially related to the attack on the Capitol. He tried to use the Justice Department to overturn the election. He tried to get people around him to pressure Mike Pence to take action on January 6th that he didn't want to take. So, and he also, we now know, or it's alleged that he believed that he knew that people were armed and sent them to the Capitol anyway. But that other stuff is not necessarily related to the attack, but some legal experts have said it could amount to a crime of obstructing Congress. And so what Garland seems to be saying here is we're investigating this whole universe of conduct, Hallie.
Talk about the next steps then for the Department of Justice, Ken, because I, was speaking with a member of Congress today, asking her about this exact thing. This is what the Attorney General has said, what the DOJ does next. And she was basically like, yeah, I'm kind of watching like everybody else. She's a Democrat. She hopes they do something. But what would be the sort of next breadcrumbs here that we might want to be following?
Well, we already saw what looks to me like a pretty big development with this the grand jury subpoena to Mark Short, the chief of staff of former Vice President Pence, who is the highest-ranking person inside the Trump White House that we know of, who has testified before this federal grand jury investigating January 6th. And Short is a key witness because he was involved in some White House meetings where people were trying to pressure Mike Pence. He was also with Pence during the attack. So what I would expect to see is the continued parade of some of the same witnesses who've testified before the January 6th committee. It's actually surprising that some of them haven't already testified before that grand jury. But, you know, the Justice Department has a different clock than the January 6th committee. They have some time to pursue this case, and it appears they're going to do it very thoroughly, Hallie.
Ken, Delaney, and Ken, thank you so much. It's good to see you. Lester Holt, by the way, is in the building here in Washington after this interview. I just ran into him. He's getting ready for the show. Nightly News, 6:30 Eastern. You will watch more of that exclusive interview. Do not miss it. Speaking of former President Trump, guess where he is today? He's back in Washington for the very first time since the inauguration day for President Biden. Mr. Trump in front of a room of former administration officials and allies for this speech, claiming that the January 6th investigation, he says, is spreading disinformation.
What they do is they say this stuff, and it's happening now with the January 6th. They say stuff, and they think you're going to believe it. It's a serious, it is a horrible, horrible thing.
You got to keep in mind when you hear the former president say that the people that the January 6th committee have put forward are members of Donald Trump's own inner circle, members of his family, people that he chose, he picked to put in the White House. That's how the committee has laid out these claims about Donald Trump's inaction, they say, during January 6th, his election fraud lies. And then there's the guy on the other side of your screen, right? The, I don't know, elephant in the district, you might want to call him, former Vice President Mike Pence. Also in Washington today, less than a mile down the road from where Donald Trump was, also delivering a speech, this one to young conservatives. A split-screen moment that's interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's just a couple of weeks now after we learned from the January 6th hearings that Mr. Trump thought his then vice president deserved those hang Mike Pence chants, according to testimony, because Pence went through with the legal certification of the 2020 election results showing Donald Trump lost. The second thing here, if we see these two go head-to-head in a 2024 Republican primary for president, there's the question of who conservatives would back. Polling shows it is likely to be Mr. Trump. Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, I saw you at about 5 o'clock this morning, I think, from the same area, the same ballroom. I know you've been out there. You've been covering Donald Trump's speech. I think that we have to address what I think a lot of viewers might be thinking, which is this is somebody now delivering a speech in Washington, again, significant in that he is not literally in the shadow of the Capitol, but he's only a mile and a half down the road from where the insurrection happened. That is hanging over every single thing that Donald Trump does from now until if and when he does decide to run for president here. This isn't like typical politician, typical, like, you know, gaming out how an election may go talk here. And I want to be, like, pretty candid and transparent about that covering Donald Trump now is different than covering Donald Trump even several years ago.
And, you know, we were talking about the Department of Justice. We're 8 blocks away from where Merrick Garland is doing his work, along with prosecutors from the Attorney General's office. You know, Hallie, I think you're absolutely right, because on two accounts. Number one, over the course of the last hour, you didn't hear the former president deny the allegations that were laid out in damning evidence and testimony from not only his family members, but former staffers, other White House officials, but also he continues to double down on the very basis of the investigation. And that was the fact that Donald Trump was a part of a scheme to try to overturn the election. Just from the stage here, yet again, he made the claim that he won in 2016 and won in 2020. And another quote of his here, when talking about the January 6th Select Committee, was, quote, "They want to damage me, so I cannot go back to work for you. And I don't think that's going to happen." This is about political power from Donald Trump, who suggested to this crowd that he is the most persecuted American in the history of this country. That is the basis in which the former president, after a year and a half out of Washington, returned to essentially lay down a foundation for a potential political run for himself here in the future.
There's also the Mike Pence factor, right? And I thought it was fascinating today to hear Pence articulate something that, in talking with people close to him, they see as one of the animating factors if both of these two decide to run in 2024, and that is Mike Pence seeking some sort of claim, right, to lay a claim to the sort of Trump loyalists, given that Mike Pence was obviously in the White House when Donald Trump was president, was part of some of the policy decisions that were made. But at the same time, laying out a ton of distance as it relates to January 6th and the election fraud lies that even now Donald Trump is continuing to push.
And Mike Pence is making the case that Republican voters need and are looking for somebody that articulates policies and optimism that look toward the future instead of, in his own words, not, quote, complaining about the past. Take a little listen to more of the former vice president earlier today.
So I don't know that our movement is that divided. I don't know that the president and I differ on issues. But we may differ on focus.
And again, what you heard from the former president today was a focus so much on the past, the former vice president trying to look ahead. But it would be, frankly, Hallie, for the former vice president or any other Republican, it would be a massive effort that would have to be constructed here, because Donald Trump essentially has the apparatus of an incumbent, a super PAC with more than $100 million. We saw former administration officials, former cabinet officials, dozens of former senior White House officials here. You saw Kevin McCarthy, the current House Minority Leader. You saw Newt Gingrich. You saw multiple U.S. senators here. This is still very much a Republican Party that is foundationally around the former president. And if Mike Pence were to want to do this, they would have to begin to peel off and turn those cracks in this party into something much more.
NBC's Vaughn Hilliard on his beat tonight. Vaughn, thank you very much. Good to see you. WNBA superstar Brittany Griner, who's being held in Russia on drug charges. She was in court today in Moscow, where her defense team argued she never meant to bring cannabis into the country and that she only used it for pain, that it was medicinal and not recreational. I want to show you this. Here she is. This is in the courtroom, right? She's in this like cell thing. She's holding up pictures there, photos of her wife, her friends, her teammates. Her defense arguing the vape cartridges with cannabis found by Russian officials in her bags were there by accident because she was packing up in a rush. Her team also brought in a drug abuse expert who argued that in some countries, cannabis is a popular treatment that is used by athletes to help with pain. You know, we almost never hear from Griner. It's really rare, but an ABC News producer managed to exchange a few sentences with her. Griner had a message for her wife, Sherelle. Watch.
Do you want to say something to Sherelle?
Good luck on the bar exam.
How do you feel? Do you have any complaints?
No complaints. Waiting patiently.
Griner has pleaded guilty to those drug charges and faces potentially up to 10 years in prison. I want to bring in now NBC's Matt Bradley, who is covering this story for us. And Matt, the developments today, it is of a piece, like Brittany Griner has already pleaded guilty. The idea now, her defense team hopes, is that she will get some kind of a lighter sentence here.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the strategy, right? That they're sort of throwing themselves on the mercy of the court and begging for leniency. And that's why we're seeing sort of this strange, political pantomime going on in court where we're talking about how other countries treat their cannabis. That's the kind of argument that I can't see really being entertained in a U.S. court either. But it just goes to show something that it gets missed a lot about the Russian judicial system, which is that judges and these courts really do have a lot of latitude when it comes to sentencing. So it really does make sense for Griner's team to not deny what they did and to just go ahead and plead guilty, because in these courts, too, about 99%, somewhere from 95 to 99% of people get convicted. So the likelihood is that Ms. Griner will be convicted. And that's really the only point when the U.S. can step in and start talking about a prisoner exchange. It's only after we see that conviction. And that could take many more months.
We've also, tomorrow kind of is the big day, Matt, because in the wee hours of the morning, right, early morning here, East Coast time, not so early for you, we know that Griner may finally testify. That's the expectation, possibly even answer some questions here. I have to wonder at how much of an impact her voice is going to have here, speaking now in court, which, again, really rare for her.
Well, I mean, I think it will have a big impact, and we've seen that from how the defense has been acting, right? Because the defense has been throwing out these really sort of off-the-wall arguments, talking about how other countries behave, sort of educating the court on how, cannabis law operates outside of Russia. It goes to show that there might be some leeway, and that actually Brittany Griner might do well to try to impress the court herself and really kind of throw herself on the mercy of the court. That's really what we're talking about here. And it would be tempting to talk about truth and justice and you know, guilt and innocence, but at the same time, she really just has to get a light sentence, because at the end of the day, she will very likely be convicted. And a light sentence will make it much easier for her to be traded. And that really is the only salvation that she's looking for right now. So I think that she can get up on the stand tomorrow and, I mean, if I were her, turn on the waterworks, really try to impress the court with an emotional appeal to how she really wants to be freed and how minor her crime was and how she was essentially just mistaken the whole time. I mean, that seems like the way that her defense attorneys are taking it. I bet that's how she's going to play it, too.
Matt Barley, I know you'll be watching. We'll be watching. Thank you so much. It is likely the White House will be watching. They're telling us tonight that the president is getting regular updates about the status of negotiations to secure Brittany Griner's release, along with other people detained, including Paul Whelan in Russia. And you know who else is watching all this? Trevor Reed, another American who understands what it is like to be in a Russian prison because he was in one for nearly 3 years. He just got released in April in a prisoner swap. I spoke with him exclusively, as he tells me he's now making it his mission to bring home Griner, Whelan, and others. We're going to have more of that conversation coming up a little later in the show. Missouri's lieutenant governor tonight declaring a state of emergency in and around St. Louis because of major rain, a history-making rainfall that turned streets into rivers, forced people out of their homes. Officials confirmed earlier this is deadly. One person has been killed. Take a look at however you're streaming this right now at what's on your screen. These images coming into us basically all day long from this area. Roads had to be shut down because of how swamped they were. One woman who had to relocate to a shelter told our local affiliate in St. Louis that she and her family are now going to have to rebuild everything from the ground up.
That's what bothers me the most is photos that can't be replaced.
It is understandably emotional. St. Louis saw its highest 24-hour rainfall on record with more than 9 inches of rain, according to the National Weather Service. The city's last record was set in 1915. A little bit of a silver lining. Forecasters say the worst of the rain is over, but they may see a little bit more and maybe some flash flooding early tomorrow. Maggie Vespa is in Hazelwood, Missouri, about 20 minutes outside St. Louis. Maggie, tell us what it's like on the ground there. You've been talking to folks. You've been out there. Give us a sense of it.
Yeah, Hallie, more than anything, everyone is really just shocked by how quickly this came on and how caught off guard everybody really was. In case in point, this is a tow truck behind me towing a car that stalled during the floods and has been here since early morning when these floodwaters hit. Behind that car that's getting towed is an apartment complex where close to 100 people, authorities say, were trapped inside these apartments and had to be rescued by boat. So the floodwaters have largely receded, as you can see, but everybody's just kind of wrapping their minds around what happened here, the damage that's left behind, and again, how caught off guard they were. It's also worth noting, just to drive home how sudden this was, we talked to a local news crew from that affiliate that you just played that soundbite from, KSDK, 2 morning reporters. And Hallie, you and I, we both worked in local news. These 2 reporters were out covering this for their morning show. They had advice from their meteorologist on where to go. They had instruction from their management on how to do this safely. Their news car was flooded all of a sudden, and they had to be rescued by firefighters. And they said we were doing everything right, but that's a testament as to how fast these waters came on, Hallie. And by the way, they are doing okay, just very rattled.
I bet. I mean, my goodness, Maggie, you know, I think about the first responders, too, and how busy they've been here, because you talk about how this came on so quick, you know?
Exactly. And you look at this apartment complex behind me here, and like I said, 100 people stranded here, authorities now say. But one person told our affiliate here and our crew on the ground that they had to wait for hours before someone would come and, again, bring them out by boat. So imagine that water slowly rising, or in some cases quickly rising, and waiting for that help all that time. But first responders also told us they were rescuing people from off of rooftops. They were rescuing people from outside, pulling them from cars on highways. And then, as you said earlier, they announced one person sadly died. They couldn't get to all the cars in time. And as the floodwaters receded, they saw that person inside a car. They've yet to name that person. But again, confirming they've passed away. Hallie.
You got to think about, you know, one thing when Al Roker comes on the show, right, we talk all the time about, you know, forecasts for rain like this and the climate connection specifically, right, the connection to climate change. Talk about the factor of that here.
Right. Yeah, so basically climate scientists are warning us, hey, you know, the problem here is, yeah, we talk about flooding season and flash flood season, and we are in what's traditionally flash flood season, but keep in mind our temperatures are warming. We're in the middle of this climate crisis, and as those temperatures get warmer, the air basically can hold more moisture. So when you get heavy rainfall, it's all the heavier than it ever has been. So these events are becoming that much more likely. And just to kind of put it in context, again, we're in flash flood season. The Midwest floods sometimes, it happens. But the rainfall that came overnight from midnight on, it was more than 9 inches. That shattered a record that was set in 1915. And climate scientists say it's more than St. Louis typically gets in July and August combined. So this is historic. This is extreme. And again, scientists say it's a preview of what's to come amid this climate crisis. Send it back to you.
Maggie Vespa, thank you so much. Glad you're there for us. Appreciate it. Coming up, it is still real hot for millions of us. So hot that officials think a lawnmower may have started a fire that burned a bunch of homes. We'll tell you about that. Plus, some researchers are getting a sense that dogs' noses, like that one, act differently than any other animal. That's one of our 5 things. We're going to be right back. Very dangerous heat is building across the South and on the West Coast. You've got 32 million people under a heat alert, with places like Dallas and Little Rock and Memphis. Look at the map, seeing temperatures in the upper 90s and into the hundreds through the rest of the week. Could feel like 110. The hot weather's just getting over to the Pacific Northwest. It could break records in places like Seattle and Portland. And then, of course, there's the fire factor. We talked about this fire near Yosemite. Our George Solis is there. We'll get to him in just a couple of minutes. But I want to start with Antonia Hilton, who is joining us live in Dallas. And Antonia, I know I sound like a broken record, but we have to say it. It is summer. It gets hot in the summer. This is dangerous hot. This is scary hot, right? This is different even for people in Texas.
That's right. Texans are no strangers to a hot summer, but everyone that I've been talking to says that this is something different. They are exhausted, and pretty much everyone is sweaty right now. And as you can see behind me, this is really the only relief they can get. Going to public pools or parks like this one where there are splash pads and they and their kids can run around and cool off and just get away from the intensity for just a little while. We're under a heat advisory here until about 8 p.m. And those triple digits are expected to last until about Friday, when the temperature will go down just a little bit, and people here are praying, Hallie, that they can get a little bit of rain. Take a listen to a conversation that we had with a group of kids here.
It feels like also being like in a oven, just getting hotter and hotter, being baked on. Your skin is burning up. You feel it less through your clothes, but on your skin it actually feels a lot worse.
We just got out of the fountain over there.
But it feels hot, and I couldn't tell the difference between the sweat and the water.
Some of the people we've talked to have described feeling like they're walking through the air of a blow dryer. One gentleman that we met who was working as part of a construction crew earlier today, they were out around 6, 7 in the morning, already drenched in sweat, and say that for them, you know, they're familiar with this area, have in some cases lived here a long time, that this feels different, Hallie.
We're going to get to the sort of big fires with George in just a second, but there you're dealing with people in Texas who are dealing with like brush fires, right? And wildfires on a different scale too, because of the dryness of this.
That's right. We're dealing with a drought and this high heat right now. And so what we saw happen in a northeast suburb of Dallas just yesterday was that some workers were out mowing a lawn. That mower hit a rock and sparks flew and started a grass fire that ended up, Hallie, destroying 9 homes and damaging more than a dozen others. And so families last night became homeless at possibly the very worst time to become homeless. I mean, the temperatures are unbearable, but also exceedingly dangerous. And so the Red Cross has been on the scene helping those families, but the city has also put out communications consistently that if you are somewhere where you don't have access to air conditioning or you don't have, you know, cool water to drink, that you can come to cooling sites or to public parks like this one, and the city will assist you. They really want people to keep an eye out for each other, especially for neighbors or elderly folks who you're worried may not have access to all that. Check in on them or bring them to sites like this to stay safe, Hallie.
Antonia Hilton, that is some good advice there, good guidance. Thank you. Let me bring in, as mentioned, George Solis, who's live in Mariposa County in California. George, tell me what it's like there, because at this point we know thousands of people have been told go somewhere else. This fire's happening near Yosemite. What's new in the last few hours, and where does this go from here?
Yeah, Hallie, firefighters seem to be getting the upper hand on the Oak fire. At last check, 26% containment. Still, some 18,000 acres have been scorched by this fire. Overnight, firefighters were able to dump more than 300,000 gallons of water on this fire. And yesterday around this time, we could actually see plumes of smoke deep coming from the Sierras, and that plume seems to be diminishing. So that is all a very good sign. We also heard that the smoke and fire were moving towards burn scar areas. These are areas that have already burned, therefore fuel for this fire seems to be also diminishing. Again, all pointing to very good signs, but this still continues to be a pretty intense fight on the ground and on the air. And the fact that, we've been driving around and seeing less firefighters around these residential areas also pointing towards a good sign, but it does mean that they are in these harder to reach areas. Still, though, the smoke here, much a factor in all of this. The smoke has been seen miles away, hundreds of miles away, still in the Bay Area. Just to give you a sense of what we're still dealing with out here. And the heat, well, that's no joke. Any bit of moisture would help. Earlier, we saw some small droplets of rain, and that was very encouraging. Firefighters hopeful that by the weekend they are able to contain this fire. And as for the homeowners out here, well, here we are standing where a homeowner lost everything. And that is the biggest fear for a lot of families who are still at shelters right now, coming back and finding that their homes were destroyed. The numbers keep fluctuating here. At last check, we were looking at around 40 to 41 structures that were damaged. Some of those homes, a lot of those other buildings in the region here. But this community is strong. A lot of people we've been talking with are hopeful that things will get better throughout the next couple of days. Yesterday, we were able to feature a cat that was rescued. We're waiting for an update on that. But overall, again, the fight continues here in Mariposa, and people are supporting their firefighters. Yeah. And again, it looks like this fire might actually be contained by the weekend. So that's a very encouraging sign when you think about how quickly this fire began to spread and how quickly it spread. Hallie?
It is refreshing to have some good news potentially on that front. George Solis, thanks very much. Appreciate it. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, Russia says it's going to quit the International Space Station after 2024. They plan to withdraw. The head of Russia's space agency told state media it'll focus on building its own space station. And it's an announcement that kind of throws into question the future of the 24-year-old ISS. NASA and its partners had hoped to keep it up and running until 2030. Number 2, 3M, creating a $1 billion trust for service members who said its earplugs did not protect them from hearing loss. Lawyers representing those service members called the trust woefully underfunded. 3M has won 6 earplug-related lawsuits. They've lost 10 of them, and they've faced almost $250,000 more. The company previously said the earplugs were safe when properly fitted. In 2018, it settled a lawsuit with the DOJ, which alleged 3M knew it supplied the U.S. military with defective earplugs. 3M did not admit any wrongdoing, though. Number 3, Pennsylvania Republican Congressman Glenn Thompson attended his gay son's wedding just a couple of days after voting against a House bill that would federally protect same-sex marriage. His press secretary argued the bill was an election year messaging stunt for Democrats and confirmed to NBC News the congressman and his wife were thrilled to celebrate their son's marriage. Number 4, Mega Millions. You know what it is. Do I even have to tell you? $830 million. Straight up. Maybe not straight up. Like half of it will go to taxes. $487 million. That's still a lot of money, okay? That is still a lot of money. And in fact, it would be the 3rd largest prize if somebody wins tonight in Powerball's history, or Mega Millions history. So get out there, get your tickets if you want. Number 5, a new study suggests dogs can kind of see with their noses. Isn't that unbelievable? Researchers found vision and sense of smell are connected in dog brains, something that doesn't happen in any other species. It's still not clear exactly how this works. One of the study's authors explained it as like, we use our eyes to look around the room, but dogs also use their smell to interpret their surroundings. I used to have a dog walker who would say that when dogs go out and sniff around, that's how they were reading the news. Seems like he was onto something. When we come back, my exclusive interview, one-on-one with Trevor Reed, the American released from Russia in a prisoner swap back in April after having been detained for nearly 3 years. We talk about how he's adjusting to being home again next. To an NBC News exclusive now, an update on how Trevor Reed is doing, the former Marine who was held in a Russian prison for nearly 3 years, who finally got out in April after a prisoner swap. I sat down with Trevor. We talked, because he tells me that since he's been back in the U.S. these last few months, his mission now, as he sees it, is to try to make sure that other detainees get home. He wants to use his platform to put pressure on the Biden administration. There are a couple of other Americans being held in Russia, as you know, Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan. Reed tells me if the president wanted to get them out quickly, he could. But when we spoke, he also wanted to make it really clear. He's grateful to this administration for getting him safely out of Russia. Now that he's home, he spent the last 3 months recovering both physically and mentally. For Trevor Reed, being back in Texas feels different, literally.
It's really hot here. I don't remember it being that hot before.
He's adjusting, getting stronger now that he's home after nearly 3 years detained in Russia. Sentenced to 9 years in prison for assaulting a police officer, charges Reed denies in a trial the U.S. called Theater of the Absurd. Reed, released earlier this year in a dramatic moment captured on camera, a prisoner swap on a tarmac in Turkey. When did it sink into you that you are home, you are free, and you are not going to have to go back?
I think after probably a few days there at the hospital, I realized that, okay, this is too long to be a dream. This must be real. And at that point, I guess you know that it's real, but you still have trouble believing that. I still have trouble believing that sometimes, to be honest with you.
Even now?
Yeah, even now.
A Marine veteran, Reed has a new mission these days to put public pressure on the U.S. government to get other detainees home, like Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan, both Americans considered by the Biden administration to be wrongfully detained by the Kremlin.
If it's possible for me to raise awareness about their case and get other people involved to push the government, then that's something that I feel that I need to do.
Do you feel called to that, Trevor?
Yeah, I think that's just a basic duty that all Americans have. But for me, it's more than that. Just because I know what they went through and how much they're suffering there.
Reed can understand it.
Every day that you're in there is a nightmare.
Like very few Americans can.
I wasn't cooperating with the Russians. I was resisting all of their laws and rules, and I didn't comply with what they wanted me to do, so I was being punished by put in solitary confinement, and conditions there are much worse than in a regular forced labor camp.
You thought they were trying to break you?
Yeah, they wanted to. They thought that if they, punished me long enough that I would give up, but that wasn't ever going to happen.
After Whelan's imprisonment, the Kremlin claimed Russians never use people as diplomatic pawns. The Kremlin does appear interested in a potential prisoner swap, freedom for Griner and perhaps Whelan in exchange for notorious Russian arms dealer Victor Bout. The State Department not commenting on a possible exchange.
There's two Americans who are sitting in there for nothing. And, if it takes letting go of an actual criminal who has already sat in American prison for, I think, almost 20 years, that seems like it's worth it to me.
Is the White House, is the president doing enough, in your view, to get them out?
I can't say 100% what the White House is or is not doing. That's obviously not public information, but in my opinion, the White House has the ability to get them out extremely fast, and they clearly have chosen not to do that. So no, in my opinion, they're not doing enough.
Does it frustrate you that, in your opinion, they're not doing more?
Yeah, that frustrates me that they're not doing more. The White House, has that position to go out and say, yeah, we're going to make this exchange. We're going to get these guys back for this guy. And, they have the ability to do that. So why they haven't already done that, is a little bit beyond me. I can't understand why you would wait that long to do that.
Reed made clear in our conversation he's thankful for what the president has done for him and says he's still waiting for a meeting with the White House.
I'm extremely grateful that the Biden administration and that President Biden made that decision to get me out. And I think that was the ethical decision, and I think that they did the right thing. But I think that, he has the responsibility to continue doing the right thing.
If you could get a message to Brittany Griner, what would you tell her right now?
Yep, I would tell her to hang in there, that she has a huge base of support in the United States who is fighting for her.
A message Reed echoed in a letter to Paul Whelan, written soon after Reed was released.
I'd tell him to keep up the fight, and don't give up, and, semper fidelis.
What went through your mind when you found out and you realized you were getting released, you were getting sent home, but Paul was still back in Russia, detained?
Yeah, that was extremely difficult for me. I didn't find that out until I was already on the plane on the way home. But, sorry. It's not a good feeling. You have a strong feeling of guilt there that, you're leaving one of your brothers behind. So that was difficult, and I knew that as soon as I got out, I would do everything that I could to fight for Paul Whelan to be returned to the United States.
The White House tells NBC News Griner and Whelan have been top of mind for the president and the national security team, adding President Biden has been clear about the need to see every American who is wrongfully detained or held hostage abroad released. It's not just Whelan and Griner. An estimated 60-plus other Americans are detained in countries around the world. Some of their faces displayed on a new mural in Washington. Their families fighting for their freedom, like Reed. For him, this is not politics. It's personal.
This is not a partisan issue. This is something that involves all Americans.
What I hear you saying is this isn't about being a Democrat or a Republican, that's not what this is.
Right. This is about being an American.
My conversation there with Trevor Reed. The White House tonight telling NBC News that the president gets regular updates about the status of negotiations to secure the release of Griner, Whelan, and any other Americans wrongfully detained or held hostage in Russia and around the world. We will stay on top of this story and bring you any updates on that front. Coming up here on the show. For those of you who haven't paid your federal student loans in like 2 years because of the pandemic, it looks like that temporary pause may be extended yet again. We'll tell you why. Plus, Gillian Maxwell's new digs. Things like yoga, painting, team sports in the prison she's living in. That's next in The Local. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our West Coast Bureau, the National Park Service says more human remains have been found at a beach at Lake Mead. We don't know how old the remains are or how this individual or individuals died. The reason why they're coming up, water over there at the Lake Mead is at its lowest level since the reservoir was filled back in the 1930s. The water receding has exposed other human remains, even a World War II era boat. From our Southeast Bureau, convicted sex trafficker Gillian Maxwell serving time now at a low-security prison in Florida near Tallahassee, according to the prison's official handbook. She'll be spending most of her time in a cell or in a dorm with other inmates. A group that specializes in prepping people for prison life has said if she has good behavior, she'll be able to do stuff like yoga, watch movies, even perform in a talent show. Last month, the former associate of Jeffrey Epstein was sentenced to 20 years behind bars. Also from our Southeast Bureau, Romay Davis, a 102-year-old World War II veteran, honored in Alabama today for her service. She was part of an all-black, all-female unit nicknamed the 6888. They sorted through millions of pieces of mail while they were deployed over in Europe. Doing real important work, helping to connect soldiers with their loved ones. It's amazing. Earlier this year, President Biden signed a bill authorizing the Congressional Gold Medal for Davis and 5 other surviving members of the unit. Davis is its oldest living member. Amazing. All right, gang, there's a little more than a month left before this pause on repaying federal student loans is up. And you might be wondering, what is up with that? What's going on? Should I be getting ready to make those payments again? Should I be budgeting for this? There's a sign now it could be extended, actually. We're hearing that the federal government has been telling loan servicing companies not to contact people with a loan about starting their payments back up as recently as the last couple weeks. A source familiar with the matter also telling NBC News an extension of this loan moratorium seems likely. For now, right, until it's official, we have to say that for now, this pause on repayments is set to end at the end of next month, of August. Repayments on federal student loans have been paused for more than 2 years because of the pandemic. A White House official telling NBC News overnight no decision has been made yet, saying what we kind of figured, that the president's going to make a decision before this deadline comes up, right before August 31st. And on the issue of student loan forgiveness, meaning wiping that debt altogether, The White House's economic advisor says he has not heard from the president on that. Carol Lee, our NBC News White House correspondent, joins us now. So, Carol, talk to us more about like the communications with loan servicing companies here, because they're the people that actually send you the bill that says pay your loan now. So presumably, like, they'd be the first to know what's up with this.
Right, and so that's why we're sort of reading through the lines here, between the lines here, Hallie. So the Education Department recently reached out to those service companies that service student loans and said, hey, don't send letters or any notifications to borrowers just yet. Hold off on doing that. And so the presumption is that they're saying that because they're not going to have to resume paying their loans, that there's a whole process that would go into place if this moratorium was going to be lifted. And there are some who are concerned that if this is going to be lifted, that there isn't enough notice, even at this point in time, about a month out from when that moratorium ends on August 31st. So the sense is, and people we've talked to inside the White House say, that the president's likely to do this. There's just no decision yet that's been announced. And obviously, the Education Department doing this sort of outreach would suggest that the president is going to extend it. The last time he extended this was in April. And here it is again, coming up in August. And he's got to deal with it and is supposed to make a decision soon, along with that decision that you just mentioned, which is one that people are, especially liberal Democrats, are really looking out for. And that is whether he does any sort of loan forgiveness.
Big issue for younger voters, especially, Carol, right? This YouGov Economist poll found 2/3 of Americans think that student loan debt is a serious problem. I don't have to tell you what's coming up in November, and that's the midterms.
That's right. And so there's a couple things at play here. One is the president needs to energize Democrats. Young Democrats are, as you noted, they are very into this issue. They think that student loans are a huge problem. They want the president to do something about this. Extending the moratorium is one thing, but also that student loan debt forgiveness. And then you factor in the economy. I mean, the president needs to make Americans feel like they're getting something out of this economy. A lot of them dealing with inflation and other issues. And so to have them then to go to the voters a couple minutes before the midterms and say, hey, you're also going to have to start paying your student loans isn't exactly a winning argument. So there's a couple of different political cross currents here that the president is trying to navigate, and all of it points to him extending this moratorium.
Do these companies, you talked about this a little, Carol, but pull on this thread for me. Do these loan servicing companies feel like they're in a bit of a tight spot, especially if the Biden administration starts to wait longer and longer? I just think when I would get my letters about my student loan repayments, they come out before they're due, and then you get a notice, and it's a whole thing.
Yeah, same with me. You get a notice and it says, hey, your payment's coming up. We're going to debit your account. And so what the student loan servicing, the executive director of essentially an organization that represents all of these companies, is saying is that we're here at the moment. It's getting a little late. It's pretty late. If they don't say something now in terms of lifting this moratorium, then it's going to be hard for them to scramble and put this all together in order to get those payments reflowing again. So they feel like it's a little bit late. And again, that just underscores that it seems really unlikely the president is going to lift this moratorium.
Carol Lee, great to see you. Thank you so much for that reporting. I know you stay on top of it. Appreciate it. Still to come here on the show, new science that search and rescue teams are using to help them find missing people faster. We get an inside look at a tool that helps predict what somebody who's lost might do in those very critical first hours. That's coming up next. Every year, more than 500,000 people go missing in this country. And this week, NBC News is highlighting the stories of missing people who may not make those big headlines, who may not be on the national newscasts. Keep in mind that putting together a well-coordinated search for somebody quickly is, in some instances, quite literally the difference between life and death in these missing person search and rescue situations. Time is so important because the longer it goes, the likelihood of finding this missing person alive drops dramatically. Well, now, an evolving science called, and I'm quoting here, it's called lost person behavior. This science that is helping first responders by using data to better inform their decisions and by boosting the search team's chances of finding lost loved ones. Tom Winter gets an inside look. Watch.
It's like looking for a needle in a haystack, searching far and wide for the nearly 600,000 people lost each year in this country. In New Mexico, a group of third graders were lost hiking on a school trip and found safely 45 minutes after searchers got the call. In West Virginia, a search and rescue team gives the family of Robert Poor closure after finding his body. Leaders of both searches crediting an evolving strategy driven by research and guided by human behavior, cutting search times from days to hours.
One of the tools we use is a resource called Lost Person Behavior. It was a book that was written by Dr. Robert Kester, and it provides dozens of profiles of different missing person categories that we can draw from to get an idea how people tend to move.
The author says it comes down to time.
Time is not the friend of the lost person. Most people who are found in the first 24 hours are going to have a 95% chance or higher of being found alive. Once that first 24 hours goes by, that the chances start dropping.
What types of successes have you had? What's the feedback you're getting from the field?
Essentially, 50% of the finds occur within 3 hours, and about 90% of searches are concluded within a day. So we actually have some pretty good success.
He says he's done the homework.
While my research started with 24 cases of dementia, it eventually grew to 50,000 cases.
Kester created 41 categories that a missing person might fall under, and layers of behavior those missing people will likely follow. The New Jersey State Police and its search and rescue coordinator, Brian Enberg, are believers.
We find out from missing persons that, we're looking for a missing dementia patient who left this long-term care facility. Okay, well, from there, we can lay out statistically 25% were found within this ring, 50% within this ring, 75% within this ring.
Experts say it's about playing the odds, putting searchers in the best position possible to find people, hopefully alive. The case starts with the detective.
So the first thing we do is we try to gather as much information as possible from the family and friends of the victim. It could be a social media account, an email address, their cell phones, their vehicles, and we gather all these data to try to establish a search area.
Then it's time to draw the maps and put boots on the ground.
I get that first call saying, hey, we've got a vehicle located here. So that's always the first dot that goes on the map, and then I hit save. Now we've got an incident.
370. Using new technology, a search team from the State Department of Corrections, trained to find people who do and don't want to be found, take to the woods.
So that's basically showing us how well the area has been covered. So each one of these lines indicates another searcher. And as you see this has been a game changer for us to be able to track our teams like this.
They say the new maps and technology are all part of this new thinking and the hope of bringing someone home to their loved ones.
Oh, it's a phenomenal feeling. It's just a huge high, when you can come home and even if it's just bringing that closure home, it's just huge.
Tom Winter is joining us now for that fascinating inside look. So, Tom, talk about new tech, right? Because this is something that has come on the scene. There's stuff like drones that I have to think is, helpful on this front.
It can absolutely be helpful, Hallie, but not so much when we're talking about heavily wooded areas, in areas where you have forests. So in his upcoming book, where he now has almost 200,000 cases, he addresses how best to use drones. An example he draws is that in those areas with heavy brush, there's no substitute for people going through the woods trying to find somebody who could be laying down or close to a tree where they just couldn't see it from the sky. But for the 30% chance area where somebody could be in an open field or along a river or brook, that's a great area where you could fly a drone and find that person. It all goes back to what we talked about in the piece, the idea of probability and odds, putting people in the best place to find someone.
Tom Winter, I'm going to run upstairs and get you a glass of hot tea with honey, my friend. It's great reporting and clearly has taken a lot out of you. I appreciate you being with us. Thank you, friend. Good luck with your voice. And that does it for us this hour. We're going to have more for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. More coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.